Tycoon left his poor pregnant wife begging for food. 3 years later, saw her with triplets at event under a soft golden sunset that bathed the city in light. The world around them moved fast. Cars honked, businesspeople rushed past, and the clinking of cups echoed from cafes on the avenue. But for Eunji, standing barefoot behind her modest flower stall on the corner of Seonghwa Street, time moved differently. She adjusted her simple white blouse, sweat glistening on her brow, and smiled as she handed a little girl a bouquet of daisies. Her fingers, rough from days of wrapping stems and tying ribbons, worked quickly, gently. The child bowed politely, and her mother placed a few wrinkled bills in Eunji's hand. As they walked away, Eunji closed her eyes for a brief second and breathed in the scent of her flowers, her only luxury in a life of sacrifice. "Another day, another bouquet," she whispered to herself, trying to keep the sadness from creeping in. But everything changed the moment Junho arrived. He was tall, immaculate in a tailored navy suit, the kind that made heads turn. He stepped out of a black sedan, his wristwatch gleaming as the door closed behind him. People whispered, some bowed, others froze in recognition. He was the youngest CEO in the tech industry, the only son of the powerful Han conglomerate. But when his eyes met Eunji's, he wasn't a billionaire. He was a man stunned, softened. She looked up and blinked, unsure if the handsome man staring at her was truly looking for flowers, or had taken a wrong turn into her humble stall. He approached slowly, his voice low but curious. "Are those peonies?" he asked, pointing. Eunji nodded, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Yes, they just opened this morning." He picked one carefully, bringing it to his nose. "They smell like spring," he murmured. She chuckled softly. "That's why I love them. They don't need to try. They just are." Junho's gaze lingered on her. Something about the sincerity in her voice pulled at him. It had been a long time since someone spoke without agenda. "How much?" he asked. She hesitated. 5,001. He pulled out his wallet but paused. "Do you always talk to flowers like that?" She smiled, a little embarrassed. "They listen better than most people." That day he left with one peony, and came back the next day, and the day after that. First, it was always about flowers. Then it became about her. They would sit together on the curb after she closed shop, sharing rice cakes and stories. He talked about the pressure of his name. She shared how she'd raised her younger brother after their parents died. She laughed easily, without bitterness. And when he looked at her, he felt seen, not as the heir to billions, but as a man who had lost himself somewhere along the way. One night, under the dim yellow light of a street lamp, he reached out and held her hand for the first time. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked. "I don't know," she whispered, her heart pounding. "But I believe in you." That was the beginning. They began to meet in secret, in restaurants far from the city, in quiet alleys where no cameras could find them. She would arrive with petals in her hair, and he with tension in his shoulders. But when they were together, the world outside didn't matter. One rainy evening, he wrapped his arms around her and murmured, "If I were just an ordinary man, I'd ask you to be mine forever." She pulled back and looked into his eyes, her voice trembling. "You don't need to be ordinary to love me. You just need to be brave." Junho closed his eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life that wasn't pre-written by boardrooms and bloodlines. And so, in the quiet of a small guest house far from Seoul, with no guests and only the innkeeper as witness, they got married. There was no gown, no guests, just a borrowed suit and a ring bought at a night market. But to them, it was the most honest moment of their lives. That night, Eunji lay with her head on his chest, her fingers tracing the curve of his collarbone. She listened to his heartbeat and whispered, "I don't want diamonds or mansions. Just stay." "I'll stay," he promised, his lips brushing her forehead. "Even if the world turns against us." But promises made under moonlight are fragile. Days later, the world indeed came crashing in. His mother, Madame Han, discovered the secret. She arrived at his office with fury in her eyes, holding photos, legal papers, and rage masked as concern. "You married a flower girl," she hissed. What do you think this is, a drama? You're not a teenager in love, Junho. You're the heir to an empire. He tried to defend Eunji, but his voice was weak. His heart betrayed him. You think love will feed shareholders, will it silence the board, she spat. You'll lose everything. He sat in silence, the weight of his name crushing him. That night, he didn't go to Eunji. He went home, alone. She waited for hours in the rain. He didn't call, didn't write, and when he finally returned, days later, it was with a cold envelope and shaking hands. I'm sorry, he said, not daring to meet her eyes. I can't lose everything. She stared at the envelope in her hands. Money, always money. Her voice broke. I don't want this. I want you. He turned away, unable to answer. I believed in you, she whispered, and you left me with a promise I can't return. And just like that, he walked away, not knowing she was carrying his child, not knowing that the world he abandoned would grow in her belly, multiply, and someday stare back at him with his own eyes, not knowing that some stories, no matter how buried, will always bloom again. Você discerto, agora a tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcos com o nome de cada tópico que for desenvolve. Micani sobrio tópico tu com dialogo como seu faço espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com muita moco, com muitos sentimentos. De forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters o ChatGPT dice the first signs were small. A dull ache in her back when she lifted the flower crates. A strange wave of dizziness after climbing the hill to deliver a bouquet. First, Eunji ignored it. Life had taught her to be strong, to keep going. But the morning her body trembled and she had to steady herself against the stall table, something shifted. Later that day, she stood in front of a small pharmacy mirror. Her fingers shook as she held the pregnancy test, staring at the pink lines slowly forming. One line, then two. Tears welled in her eyes. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Only a whisper of disbelief. I'm pregnant. The tiny space in her chest filled with 1,000 emotions at once. Fear, joy, panic, wonder. She held her stomach gently, even though there was no bump, just the knowledge of something forming inside. Piece of him, piece of love. That night, as the moonlight poured into her room through the old window, she lit a single candle and sat cross-legged on her thin mattress. She practiced how she would tell him. Junho, I have something to tell you. No, too formal. We're having a baby. Too sudden. She placed her hand on her chest and closed her eyes. Please, let him be happy. She waited 2 days before telling him. They met behind her flower stall after dark, like always. He arrived in his usual suit, but the weariness on his face was sharper than usual. Rough day, she asked softly, placing a small bouquet of camellias in his hand. He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. My mother's been pushing meetings all week. Talks of engagement. Business partnerships disguised as marriage arrangements. Eunji's smile faltered. You always knew they'd try to control you, she said gently, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. But I didn't think I'd feel this trapped, he admitted, lowering his voice. I can't even breathe without her approval. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small envelope. What's this? He asked. She hesitated. Hope. He furrowed his brows and opened it. Inside was a photo of the pregnancy test and a small white flower petal, a symbol of life, fragility. He stared, not understanding. Then, slowly, the meaning sank in. His face paled. You're pregnant, she nodded, eyes filling. Yes, we're going to have a baby. Silence. The world seemed to stop around them. The hum of traffic, the soft rustle of wind in the trees. It all faded. He stepped back, as if the words had hit him physically. No, that can't be. Her heart broke at his tone. It's real, Junho. I took 3 tests. I've been to the clinic. He paced a few steps away, hands trembling. This can't be happening now. Do you know what this means for me, for everything I've worked for? She swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. It means we created life, you and me. It means love grew into something even more beautiful. But he wasn't listening. His mind was spinning, trapped in fears and expectations. My mother will disown me, he muttered. The board, my father's legacy. They'll ruin you, Unji. I'm not afraid of being ruined, she said, stepping closer. But I'm terrified of being forgotten. He turned toward her, pain and panic in his eyes. I need time. I need to think. No, she said, voice cracking. You don't need time. You need courage. She tried to touch his hand, but he pulled away. I love you, she whispered, tears finally spilling. But if you walk away now, you're not protecting me. You're abandoning us. He stood frozen, torn between two worlds, the woman he loved and the empire he inherited. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. She stood there alone, the city lights blurring through her tears. The next morning, she woke to find an envelope by her door. Inside, a stack of money and a note. I'm sorry. You deserve more than I can give. I hope this helps. She sank to her knees, the paper trembling in her hands. No name, no goodbye, just silence. The days that followed were a blur of nausea, exhaustion, and heartbreak. She sold fewer flowers. Her hands shook more often. Her smile faded. One evening, she sat alone on the bench near the riverside, watching other couples walk by. Her hand rested over her small stomach. It was still flat, but her heart told her it would soon grow. I promise, she said softly to the life inside her. I'll never leave you, even if I have to beg to survive. She clung to that promise through the cold nights and aching days. But deep down, a quiet sadness settled into her bones, because the man she loved had chosen silence. And she, once full of dreams and laughter, was now just a pregnant girl sitting alone in a city that moved too fast, too far, and without mercy. Yet, somewhere deep within, a quiet fire began to flicker. A mother's fire. She would carry this child. She would survive. Winter arrived earlier that year. The wind cut through her coat as if she weren't even wearing it. Each breath felt like glass in her lungs. Yet she stood every day at the same corner, holding her belly with one hand and a basket of unsold carnations in the other. One evening, her body failed her. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed on the icy sidewalk. Strangers passed. Some glanced. None stopped, until an older woman selling roasted chestnuts nearby rushed over. Are you all right, dear? The woman asked, kneeling beside her, her voice warm despite the bitter wind. I'm just tired, Unji whispered, eyes unfocused. The woman saw the bump under her coat, her thin fingers, her chapped lips. She wrapped a scarf around Unji's neck and helped her up. You can't be out here like this, she scolded gently. Come, sit by the stove at my cart. For the first time in weeks, Unji felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, kindness. But kindness didn't pay rent. 3 nights later, the landlord knocked at her door, face blank, voice colder than the frost outside. You're 2 months behind. I need the room by tomorrow morning. She begged. She cried. She offered to clean the building in exchange. But his eyes never softened. By morning, her few possessions were in a suitcase, and she was on the street, the snow falling silently around her. With trembling hands, she held her stomach. I'm sorry, baby, she whispered. I failed again. That night, she waited outside a small convenience store, hoping to feel warmth from the inside lights. Her legs were cramping, her lips cracked, her stomach ached with hunger. As the shopkeeper closed, she approached him. Excuse me, do you have anything? Anything you can't sell? Expired bread, leftovers, maybe. He stared at her, eyes darting from her swollen belly to her pale face. No charity here, he muttered, locking the door without looking back. Her knees buckled. She sat on the ground, right there on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around her belly, tears streaking down her face as the city blurred around her. Why am I the one begging? Why does he get to live in warmth while I shiver outside his world? The world seemed to have already chosen sides, and she wasn't on the winning one. But far away, in an office with floor-to-ceiling windows and lights that never dimmed, Junho sat in silence, staring at a single photograph. It was one of the few things he'd kept. A candid photo Eunji had taken of them sitting by the Han River. He was laughing. She was kissing his cheek, her hair blowing in the wind, her smile radiant. He hadn't laughed like that since. His mother stormed into the room, as she often did now, armed with numbers, contracts, and calculated threats. "I heard she's gone from her apartment," she said coldly, tossing a folder onto his desk. "The building manager called our lawyers about her overdue rent. She's out." His heart dropped. You've been monitoring her?" he asked, voice low. She crossed her arms. "Of course. I had to make sure she didn't come back begging." "You made the right choice. Don't ruin it now. She's pregnant," he whispered, more to himself than her. "I know," his mother replied, unflinching. "But a child born out of foolishness isn't a reason to destroy everything we've built." He stood suddenly, the chair screeching behind him. "She's carrying my child," he snapped. "That's not foolishness. That's a life." Her voice didn't rise, but it hit harder than any scream. "She's nothing, and if you bring her back, you'll be nothing too." He froze. That's when she played her final card. She walked to the desk, placed a document in front of him, and tapped it with her manicured finger. "Sign this merger. It's everything your father dreamed of. You'll be untouchable." He looked at the paper, then back at her. "And if I don't, you'll lose the company, your inheritance, everything, and she'll be left alone." Anyway, Junho stared at her, jaw clenched, heart breaking in a way no contract could fix. That night, he sat in his penthouse, the city glittering below, but the lights brought him no comfort, only guilt. He reached for his phone more than once, scrolling to her number, hovering his thumb, but he never pressed call. What could he say that he was sorry that he chose power over her, that he let her suffer while he hid behind boardrooms he didn't deserve to speak to her? So he stayed silent. Back in the city's forgotten corner, Eunji shuffled into the small women's shelter the chestnut lady had told her about. The beds were full, but they gave her a chair and a blanket. As she sat, rocking slowly, one of the volunteers crouched beside her. "How far along are you?" the woman asked softly. Eunji managed a small smile through chattering teeth. 5 months. The woman hesitated, then reached into her coat and handed her a small packet of cookies. "They're sweet," she said. "For the baby." Eunji took it with trembling hands. "Thank you." And for the first time in what felt like forever, she whispered to the life inside her, "We're still here." A flicker of movement. Tiny kick. She gasped, startled, then laughed, tears falling freely. The baby was listening. In the dark, in the cold, in the silence of the world's rejection, her child was alive, strong. And that meant she would be too, because while the world turned its back, "I will protect you, no matter what." The days blurred together. Frigid mornings, long walks, little food. She tried to sell small paper flowers she made from scraps, but people rarely stopped. Their eyes slid over her like she didn't exist. One afternoon, while waiting outside a bakery for day-old bread, she felt a sharp, pulling pain in her stomach. It wasn't like before. It was deeper. She leaned against a wall, breathing through it, refusing to cry. A woman in line saw her trembling and whispered to the cashier. Moments later, someone came out with a small bag. "It's not much," the girl said softly, handing it over. "But the owner said it's free." Eunji nodded gratefully, pressing the warm bag to her chest as she walked away slowly, every step a silent war against the pain. That night, lying curled in the corner of the shelter, she dreamed of him. Not the man who abandoned her. The man who once whispered promises into her hair. The man who bought a single peony just to see her smile. In her dream, he reached for her, eyes full of regret. But when she woke, her hands were empty, and she was still alone. 2 more weeks passed. Then came the snowstorm. The shelter was full. The streets were chaos. She tried to find a dry spot under a bridge, holding a piece of cardboard over her head, trying to keep her stomach warm. As wind howled through the city, Unji clutched her coat tight and whispered through chattering teeth, "Please, just one safe place, just for tonight." Her body was exhausted. She could feel her strength slipping away, like grains of sand. She hadn't felt the baby's kick in hours. A fear crept into her chest like cold smoke. Just as her vision started to blur, she heard a voice. "Miss, are you okay?" She blinked. A young man in a yellow jacket, an emergency volunteer, knelt beside her. Behind him was a van with a red cross painted on the side. "We've got space at the emergency shelter downtown," he said quickly. "You can't stay here, it's dangerous." She tried to speak, but her lips wouldn't move. He wrapped her in a blanket and helped her into the van. She passed out moments later. When she woke, she was in a hospital bed. Lights above her were too bright, and everything smelled like antiseptic and soap. She looked down. She was covered in clean sheets. Her coat was folded on a chair nearby, and she wasn't cold. A nurse entered, startled to see her awake. "Oh, good. You're conscious," the nurse said warmly, adjusting her fore. "You gave us a scare. You were severely dehydrated, and your iron was dangerously low." Unji tried to sit up, but the nurse gently stopped her. "You need to rest. For your babies." "My babies," she whispered, panic rising in her chest. They're okay?" the nurse said quickly. "We ran a scan. Their heartbeats are strong, but you need proper care now. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore." Unji's shoulders shook as she cried silently, covering her face. That night, she was moved to a quieter room. The bed was stiff, the walls pale and sterile, but to her, it felt like heaven. As she rested, her thoughts drifted back to Junho. She hadn't spoken his name in weeks, hadn't allowed herself to think of him, but lying in that bed, with machines beeping softly around her, she found herself remembering the warmth of his voice, the way he once said her name like it was precious. She reached for her belly, whispered, "He doesn't know. You're real. You're growing. He has no idea what he left behind." She stayed in the hospital for a week. No one came to visit. On the final day, she was sitting quietly by the window when a nurse entered with a large envelope. "A courier dropped this off for you." Her heart stopped. She recognized the handwriting. Junho. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was another thick stack of bills. And a letter. "Unji, I heard from someone that you'd been taken to the hospital. I didn't know what else to do but send help. Please take this. It's not enough, I know, but it's something. I hope you're okay. I really do. Jay." There was no apology, no phone number, no request to see her, just money. Again. She crumpled the letter in her fist, the tears coming before she could stop them. "Why does he keep doing this?" she whispered. "Why send money?" But not his voice, not his hands, not himself. The nurse stood quietly nearby, uncertain whether to leave or stay. "He loved me once," Unji said, half to herself. "He looked me in the eye and said I was his whole world. And now all I get are envelopes." The nurse knelt beside her. "Sometimes men like that, they don't know how to be brave," she said gently. "They think money is enough, that it can replace the mess they leave behind. It can't," Unji said bitterly, wiping her eyes. "Money doesn't hold you when you're scared. It doesn't talk to the baby when you can't sleep. It doesn't make you feel like you matter." The nurse hesitated. "Do you want me to send a message back?" Unji shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "He made his choice, and I'll make mine." She handed the money back to the nurse. "Give it to the shelter, or someone who's still waiting for help. I'll find my own way." That night, as she left the hospital with nothing but a new scarf and a borrowed coat, she didn't look back. She walked into the night, belly round, back aching, heart cracked but still beating. She was running out of options. The shelter was full again. The woman at the desk had smiled apologetically, hands folded. "I'm sorry, Mississippi. We just don't have space tonight." Maybe try the district center tomorrow morning. They sometimes take expecting mothers. But tomorrow felt like an ocean away. Unji found herself near the train station, where the lights never dimmed and people came and went without ever looking each other in the eyes. She sat on a bench, clutching her coat closed with one hand, the other resting protectively over her belly. Her lips were dry, her stomach rumbled. The last real meal she'd eaten was 2 days ago, a bowl of soup shared with a stranger at the hospital who didn't even ask for her name. She opened her bag. Inside were 2 paper flowers, a cracked phone with no signal, and exactly 4,001. Not even enough for a rice bowl. The scent of fried food drifted toward her from a vendor's cart nearby. Her body tensed at the smell, her hunger sharpening into something primal. Her babies were quiet, still. She hadn't felt them move much all day. A wave of fear hit her hard. They're hungry too. She stood up, legs trembling, and approached the cart. The vendor was an older man, wearing a thick parka and a wool beanie. His cart was steaming with hot buns, skewered meat, and rice cakes glazed in sweet sauce. She tried to smile, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you, but I haven't eaten. I'm pregnant, and I don't have enough to pay." The vendor turned, looking her over. His expression shifted from surprise to discomfort. "I'm sorry, miss," he said quickly, avoiding her eyes. "I can't give away food. It's policy. If I start handing things out, I'll lose everything." She nodded, ashamed. "I understand. I just thought maybe something old, or..." "No," he said, sharper this time. "I'm sorry. Please move along." He turned his back on her. Unji stood there a moment longer, blinking hard, before stepping away. Her vision blurred. Her knees felt weak. The shame burned hot beneath her skin. She sat down on the curb, one hand pressed against her side, trying to calm the tightening in her abdomen. The babies still weren't moving. She rocked back and forth slightly, whispering softly to them. "It's okay. Mama's here. We'll get through this. Just hold on for me." From across the street, someone was watching. A woman in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair tucked under a shawl, sat beside a cart selling roasted chestnuts. Her eyes were kind, her coat old and patched, and when she saw Unji's trembling form, she grabbed a small paper bag and began walking across the road. She crouched beside her, speaking softly. "You shouldn't be out here alone like this, sweetheart." Unji looked up, startled. Her lips parted, but the words stuck in her throat. The woman gently offered her the bag. "Take it. It's still warm." Unji hesitated. I don't want to take your food." "It's not charity," the woman smiled. "It's kindness, and we all need a little of that." Unji's hands shook as she accepted it. She opened the bag and immediately the sweet, earthy smell of roasted chestnuts filled her nose. Her eyes filled with tears before she could even take a bite. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracking. "You have no idea what this means." The woman sat beside her, brushing some snow off the bench with her sleeve. "I've seen you walking around here these past few days, always looking tired, always holding your belly like it's all you've got left." Unji didn't know what to say. "You're not the first girl who's sat on this street lost," the woman continued gently. "But maybe you don't have to stay lost." "I don't have anywhere to go," Unji admitted. "No home, no family, no one." The woman tilted her head. "Well, you do now. Come with me. I don't have much, but I've got a roof and a warm stove and an extra blanket." Unji stared at her, disbelief flickering in her tired eyes. "Why would you help me?" The woman smiled faintly. "Because someone once helped me, and I promised I'd pass it on." The next hour passed in a haze. The woman, who introduced herself as Madame Haija, led Unji through narrow side streets, up a quiet hill, to a small home tucked behind a garden of frozen rose bushes. The house was old but clean. Warm light spilled from the windows. Inside, the walls smelled like ginger tea and steamed rice. "You can stay in my daughter's old room," Haija said. "She moved abroad a few years ago, said she needed to find her own story." Unji stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. There was a bed, a real bed, a dresser, curtains, a framed photo of a family smiling in front of a lake. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, voice trembling. "You can thank me by eating and resting," the old woman said with a wink. "That little one inside you is depending on you." Unji looked down at her belly. Still no movement. I haven't felt them in hours." Haija's expression grew serious. "Let's call my son. He's a doctor. Works at the clinic near the train station. He'll come check you, no charge." An hour later, a gentle knock came at the door. A young man in his early 30s entered, warm eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses. "This is my son, Dr. Min Jae," the old woman said proudly. He introduced himself with a kind smile. "Let's take a look, shall we?" He examined her carefully, calmly. The room was silent until the gentle thump-thump-thump of heartbeats echoed from the small monitor. 3. Unji gasped. Min Jae nodded slowly, smiling. "You're carrying triplets." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Triplets? They're strong. You've done well to carry them this far, especially under so much stress." Her lips trembled. "I thought I was losing them." Min Jae knelt beside her, speaking gently. "You're safe now, and so are they." She looked between the two strangers who had taken her in, fed her, comforted her, without asking for anything in return. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt the tiniest flicker of hope. Not from money, not from apologies in envelopes, but from warmth. Unji stood by the window of the little bedroom Haija had given her, cradling her belly with both hands. The triplets inside her were more active now, their tiny kicks often startling her in the middle of the night. She'd learned to whisper to them, singing lullabies in soft tones while the moon hung low outside. There were still moments of fear. Some nights, when the wind rattled the old house, she'd wake up gasping, heart pounding, the memory of Seoul and its cold streets crashing down on her like a nightmare. But then she'd hear Madame Haija's gentle humming from the kitchen or feel the warmth of the blankets tucked around her shoulders, and she'd remember. She was not alone anymore. One morning, as she helped fold laundry in the yard, Min Jae approached her with a clipboard in one hand and a gentle smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I spoke to the hospital in town," he said, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "They're ready to take you in when the time comes. They'll prepare for a high-risk delivery." Unji glanced down at her belly, which had grown so large now she could barely see her feet. "It could be any day now," he nodded. "And you'll be in good hands." She hesitated, her voice softer. "You've already done so much for me, for us. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," he said simply. "Not everything good comes with a price." Unji, her throat tightened. "It's just, I'm not used to people staying, people helping without expecting anything." He looked at her then, long and quiet. "Well," he said, "maybe it's time you got used to it." That night, as they all sat around a small table sharing hot soup and rice, Haija told stories about her youth. She laughed easily, her eyes sparkling as she remembered her late husband's awful dancing and her daughter's first job. Unji smiled and listened, but her thoughts kept drifting. A part of her still hurt, still wondered, was Junho out there, living as if she had? Never existed. Did he know she'd survived? Did he even care whether their children had made it through the cold, through the hunger? The ache in her chest never fully went away, no matter how kind this new home was. The wound still bled quietly at night, when everyone else was asleep. But she never said his name aloud again. Weeks passed. Her body grew heavier, her breath shorter, and then one dawn it happened. She woke with a pain that tore through her like lightning, her hand flying to her belly as the sheets twisted beneath her. Another pain, sharper, deeper. She cried out, clutching her side. "Something's wrong." Madame Haija burst into the room seconds later, followed by Min Jae. One look at Unji's face, and Min Jae was already dialing the hospital. "She's early," he said. "We have to go. Now." The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and prayer. Unji gripped the edge of the stretcher as her contractions worsened. Sweat rolled down her face. Her hair clung to her skin. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. Min-jae walked beside her, holding her hand. "You're not alone. You're strong, Eun-ji. You've already brought them this far. Just a little more." Inside the delivery room, the doctors moved quickly. Machines beeped. Nurses spoke in rushed voices. Everything became a whirlwind of motion, color, and noise. She felt her heart racing, tears streaming down her face as the pain intensified. She screamed, not just from the physical agony, but from everything: the months of hunger, the cold, the betrayal, the fear of being forgotten. And then, through the haze, she heard it. A cry, then another, and another. 3 voices, fragile, fierce. Her world cracked open. She wept as they placed one tiny baby after another on her chest. They were small, so small, but they were breathing. Alive, warm. Min-jae stood in the corner, quietly wiping his eyes, overwhelmed by the moment. Madame Haija held a hand over her mouth, shaking with silent joy. Later that night, after the chaos had passed, the nurses left, and the lights had dimmed, Eun-ji lay in her hospital bed with 3 tiny blankets beside her. She stared at them, these little lives that had once been only whispers in her womb. "Do you see?" she whispered to them. "We made it." She leaned down and kissed each forehead gently. "You don't know how many nights I thought I couldn't. That maybe you wouldn't get to feel the sun, or hear music, or smell flowers." A tear fell from her cheek onto the smallest baby's swaddle. "But you're here now, and I swear you'll never have to beg for warmth the way I did." The door creaked open quietly, and Min-jae stepped inside. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She looked at him, her eyes full of exhaustion and wonder. "I keep checking to make sure they're still breathing." He smiled softly. "That's what parents do." She didn't answer right away. Her gaze fell to the babies again. "I never thought I'd be able to call myself that," she whispered. "Not after everything." "Well, you are," he said gently. "And they're lucky to have you." She turned to him slowly, her voice barely audible. "Do you ever wonder if their father thinks about them?" There was a long pause. "I don't know," Min-jae said quietly. "But I think if he had any heart at all, he'd be ashamed of what he gave up." Eun-ji looked back down. "I used to dream he'd come back, that he'd walk through a crowd and see me, holding them, and realize he made a mistake." Her voice cracked. "But now, I just hope he stays far enough away not to hurt them." Min-jae stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "They have a mother who gave up everything for them. That's more than most people ever get." She smiled through her tears. Outside the hospital window, the first spring rain began to fall soft and steady. And inside, for the first time in many months, Eun-ji no longer felt like she was waiting. She had found something more powerful than what she'd lost. 3 of them, each swaddled in pastel cloths, pink, blue, yellow, lying peacefully in the bassinet beside her bed. She couldn't stop staring. Their faces were round, their noses so small, and their tiny fists curled as if ready to face the world. But as the hours passed and visitors came and went, nurses checking vitals, Madame Haija bringing warm soup, Min-jae coming in quietly just to smile, something else began to settle inside Eun-ji. Fear. The joy of surviving the birth was slowly being replaced by a creeping dread she hadn't prepared for. 3 babies, no job, no home of her own, no family name to fall back on, and no father in sight. Late one evening, after the nurses had dimmed the lights and the hallway had gone silent, Eun-ji sat alone, watching her babies sleep. Her hand trembled as she reached for her journal, a small, worn notebook she'd carried since before the pregnancy. She opened it to a blank page and began writing, her tears dotting the ink as she whispered aloud. "Today, you came into the world, and I thought that would be the hardest part. But now I see, it's just the beginning." She paused, wiping her cheek. "I want to be strong for you. I need to be, but I'm scared. I'm so scared I won't be enough." There was a gentle knock on the door. She quickly closed the journal and turned, her heart skipping as Min-jae entered carrying a soft blanket. "Sorry," he said, smiling. "I thought you might want this." "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still fragile from crying. He placed it over her legs and glanced toward the babies. "They're perfect. They deserve a perfect life," she murmured. "But I don't even know how I'm going to feed them once we leave this place." He pulled a chair next to her, the kindness in his eyes steadying her like a hand on her back. "I know you're afraid. Anyone would be. But you don't have to do it all alone." She looked at him, her voice breaking. "Why are you helping me? Min-jae really—" He hesitated, then answered softly. "Because I see the way you look at them, like they're your whole universe. And because I know what it feels like to be abandoned by someone who was supposed to stay." She blinked, surprised. "My father left when I was 6, he continued. "One day he kissed my mother on the cheek, said he was going to buy groceries, and never came back. I remember staring out the window for weeks thinking he'd walk through that gate again." Eunji's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head. "It made me who I am. It taught me what kind of man I didn't want to be." They sat in silence, the weight of memory shared between them like something sacred. "Do you think I can really do this?" she asked, her eyes full of uncertainty. "Raise 3 children without anyone else?" "You already have," he said, not missing a beat. "You brought them into this world with nothing but courage. You gave up comfort, pride, even food just to protect them. If that's not being a mother, I don't know what is." She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. "Sometimes, I still feel like that girl on the sidewalk, begging for food." Min-jae reached out and gently touched her hand. "And look how far you've come from that night." Her eyes found the babies again. One stirred, letting out a soft yawn. "But what happens when we go home? I don't want to be a burden to your mother." "You won't be," he assured. "She's already talking about turning the back room into a nursery. And I'll help too, with diapers, with feedings, with whatever you need." Eunji's eyes searched his face. "You don't owe me that, Min-jae." He smiled, a little sad. "I know, but maybe I want to." She looked away, unsure of what to say. Her heart, so long frozen, felt like it was beginning to thaw. Not because someone had promised her the world, but because someone was showing up, quietly, without expectation. Days later, they returned to the little house on the hill. It was late afternoon when they arrived. The sky was pale and the air smelled like blooming magnolias. Haija had prepared the room already. 3 tiny beds lined up in a row, each with hand-stitched blankets, and a mobile made of paper cranes hanging from the ceiling. Tears stung Eunji's eyes as she stood in the doorway. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "You don't have to deserve it," Haija replied from behind her. "You just have to accept it." That night, after feeding and changing the babies, Eunji stepped outside for a moment of air. The sky was deep blue, scattered with stars, and the village lights twinkled in the valley below. She wrapped her arms around herself, breathing in the peace she hadn't known she needed. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Min-jae. He stood beside her in silence for a while before speaking. "I meant what I said at the hospital," he murmured. "I'll help you however I can. Not because I pity you, Eunji, but because I respect you." She turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what comes next." He met her gaze gently. "Then let's find out together." And for the first time since Junho had walked away, she let someone else's words settle into her heart. Not as a promise, not as a debt, but as something new. The triplets stirred inside, and she smiled. They would grow. They would laugh. They would have birthdays, scraped knees, and lullabies. And they would have her, maybe even more, purpose. Her days were full not of luxury, not of rest, but of meaning. And in those quiet hours when all 3 babies were finally asleep, and the silence settled like a blanket over the house, she'd sit on the floor, her back against the wall, and let the tears come. Not from sadness anymore, but from the overwhelming weight of love. Still, the world outside didn't pause. Money was tight. Haija refused to let her pay for food or diapers, but Eunji knew the older woman's pension barely covered essentials. She couldn't live off charity forever. She wouldn't. So one evening, As Min-jae rocked the babies to sleep, Eun-ji stood in the doorway, her voice firm but gentle. "I want to work." He turned to her, surprised. "Work already? You just gave birth a few weeks ago." "I know," she said, stepping closer. "But I need to stand on my own feet again, even if it's just a few hours a day." He hesitated. "What kind of work are you thinking?" "I want to make flower arrangements again," she said softly, eyes lighting up at the thought. "Like I used to. Before everything." He watched her for a long moment. "You miss it." "It was the only thing that ever felt like mine," she whispered. "Before them." Min-jae nodded slowly. "Then let's figure it out." The next morning, with the babies fed and safe with Haija, he drove her into the village center. It was small, a bakery, a post office, a school, and a tiny market square where vendors set up stalls on the weekends. Eun-ji stared at the open lot with a mix of nerves and nostalgia. "It's not Seoul," she murmured. "No," Min-jae replied. "It's better." They spoke to the village coordinator, an older man with a booming laugh and kind eyes. He remembered her. "You're the girl who had the triplets. The whole town's been talking." And within the hour, he offered her a small space by the school entrance. Just enough for a cart. Just enough for a beginning. That night, Eun-ji couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with scraps of colored paper and cheap ribbon, practicing arrangements. Her fingers were slower now, her wrists sore, but the rhythm returned like an old friend. By sunrise, a basket of handmade blooms sat ready at the door. On her first day, she only sold 3. One to a teacher, one to a student's mother, one to a shy boy buying a flower for his grandmother. But it was enough. Each coin in her pocket felt like a victory. Each smile from a stranger, a thread pulling her closer to the person she used to be. Weeks passed. Her little flower stand became familiar to the village, not just because of the blooms, but because of the woman behind them. Gentle, tired, radiant in her quiet resilience. Children began calling her Flower Mama. Adults brought her scraps of fabric, extra string, even old vases. And slowly, without her realizing, Eun-ji was no longer the girl who had been abandoned. She was the woman who had stayed. One cloudy afternoon, as she packed up her stand, Min-jae arrived holding a folded piece of paper. "Bad news?" she asked, noticing the crease between his brows. "No," he said, "just something you should see." She opened it carefully. It was a letter from a cafe in the next town over. The owner had seen one of her arrangements and wanted to commission weekly bouquets. Paid regularly. Her hands trembled. "They want my flowers," she whispered, half in disbelief. "Someone actually wants my work." "Not someone," Min-jae said. "Many people." Words spreading. Her lips trembled into a smile, and she looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "I never thought I'd feel useful again." "You were never useless," he said softly. Later that evening, as they sat in the living room with the babies sleeping nearby, Eun-ji looked over at him, a question caught in her throat. "You never asked me about him," she said. "Jun-ho." Min-jae's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "I figured if you ever wanted to talk about him, you would." She nodded slowly. "Some days I still think about what I'd say to him if I saw him again." Min-jae looked down, his fingers lightly tapping his knee. "And what would you say?" She took a long breath, then spoke quietly. "I'd ask him if he ever looks over his shoulder and wonders what he left behind." Min-jae didn't respond right away, and when he finally did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Some men look back, but not all of them are brave enough to turn around." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted. Not spoken, not declared, but felt. Later that night, after the house had gone still, Eun-ji stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching her children breathe in sync, their small chests rising and falling in perfect harmony. She didn't have a fortune, or a title, or a man standing at her side who had once promised her the world. But she had this, a roof, warmth, and her hands strong again, shaping a future out of petals and thread. She stepped back, closed the door softly behind her, and let herself smile. The triplets were 6 months old now. Eunji could hardly believe it. Their chubby cheeks, wide eyes, and unique cries filled the house with life. Each day was a dance of feeding, comforting, changing, rocking. She often felt like her body no longer belonged to her, always in motion, always serving. But her heart had never felt more full. And there was always Min-jae. He had become more than a helper, more than a kind neighbor. He had become a presence, reliable, quiet, gentle. When the babies cried at dawn, he'd be at the door with warm milk. When Eunji's hands trembled with exhaustion, he'd take the child from her arms and sing softly until sleep returned. One evening, after the babies had been put to bed, Eunji found herself sitting at the low table in the kitchen, rubbing her temples. Her hair was pulled up hastily, flour dusting her sleeves from the dumplings she had tried to make, and burned. Min-jae stepped inside, setting down a small thermos. "I made barley tea." She looked up, smiling faintly. "You're always saving me." He poured her a cup. "Maybe I like being needed." She chuckled, then went quiet. Her eyes dropped to the cup between her hands. "Sometimes I think I'm just too tired to even remember who I was before all this." "You were a fighter," he said without hesitation. "Still are." She looked at him then, something lingering in her gaze. "You don't think I'm weak?" "Not even for a second." The silence between them felt different that night, heavier, like something unsaid was stretching in the air. Min-jae leaned forward slightly. "There's something I've been wanting to ask." She braced herself, nodding. "I know I've been around a lot, and I don't want to overstep, but..." He paused, his voice softening. "Would it be okay if the babies called me Appa someday if they want to?" Eunji froze. Her heart stumbled in her chest. "I don't want to take anyone's place," he added quickly. I'm here, and I love them, all 3 of them." Her throat tightened, her fingers clenching slightly around the teacup. "You've already done more than anyone ever has," she whispered. Min-jae hesitated, searching her eyes. But she swallowed hard, eyes glossy. "But they already look like him. Every day I wake up and see their faces, and it's like I'm being reminded all over again of how he walked away." Min-jae looked down, nodding slowly. "I understand," he said. "I'm not asking you to forget him. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here, whether they call me Appa or not." Her lips quivered. "You're a good man, Min-jae. Too good." He smiled sadly. "Maybe. Or maybe I just see something worth staying for." Before she could respond, a baby's cry rang out from the bedroom. She stood quickly, brushing her skirt down. "I'll get them." But he gently touched her arm. "Let me." She watched as he disappeared into the room, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the nightlight. She listened as his voice calmed the child. Quiet words, gentle humming, and something in her chest ached, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being cared for. Days passed. One morning, as she folded tiny shirts by the window, she glanced out and saw Min-jae in the garden with the triplets in a stroller, pointing at the sky as clouds moved above them. The babies giggled. One tried to grab the breeze with his chubby fingers. And then something unexpected happened. A flicker of fear passed through her. What if this peace was only temporary? What if, one day, everything was taken from her? Again that evening, while feeding the babies, she sat across from Min-jae and whispered, "Do you ever worry that happiness is just something that waits to be stolen?" He looked at her, surprised. "Why would you say that?" "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," she said. "And part of me keeps waiting for it to happen again." Min-jae reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Eunji, I can't promise you nothing bad will ever happen again," he said honestly. "But I can promise I'll be right here when it does. And we'll face it. Together." She didn't answer. She just squeezed his hand back. That night, after the babies were asleep, she stood on the porch under the stars, arms folded tightly around herself. The wind carried the scent of rain and wood smoke, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then, a whisper from behind her. "You're allowed to be happy." She turned. Min-jae stood in the doorway watching her. "You don't have to apologize for surviving," he said, "and you don't have to keep punishing yourself for the things someone else did." She looked away. "It's hard." "I know," he said, "but you're not alone anymore." And she knew he meant it. Not in the way people said it out of politeness, but in the way someone says it when they've stood in the storm with you and never once looked for shelter. As she walked back into the house, she paused for a moment beside the crib. She bent down, kissed each child on the forehead, and whispered, "You have someone watching over you. We all do." Then she walked toward Min-jae, her steps slow, uncertain. But she didn't stop. And in the center of that world sat Junho, staring at a screen that no longer held his attention. 3 years had passed, yet he had never stopped working. It was easier to drown in deadlines and market forecasts than to confront what he had done, what he had left behind. He had built everything they said he would. $1 billion contracts, mergers, international recognition. His face appeared in magazines, on financial panels, in gala invitations addressed to Chairman Han. But none of it filled the space that opened inside him the night he walked away from Moonji. He had tried to forget. He'd even tried moving on. But no matter how many glasses of wine he sipped at rooftop events, how many empty conversations he had with women whose smiles were rehearsed, something always tugged at the edge of his mind. The way she had whispered, "I believed in you." He had once dreamed of success to prove something to the world. But lately, he wasn't sure who he was proving it to anymore. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he muttered. His assistant stepped in briskly, holding a sleek invitation bordered in silver foil. "Sir, this was delivered for your personal attention." The charity director insisted it be hand-delivered. "It's the reopening ceremony of the community center in Deechin Village. They've named you as a primary benefactor." Junho raised an eyebrow. "Deechin, yes, sir. The village where your mother's first foundation project was based." He hesitated, then took the envelope and opened it. Inside, a formal invitation, stamped with his family's seal and a list of confirmed VIPs. The event was in a few days. He turned the card over absently. "Together, let's celebrate the heart of small communities and those who give them life." He scoffed slightly. How ironic. Still, something about the name Deechin stirred a feeling in his chest. He couldn't place it, but it wouldn't go away. That night, after a silent dinner in his penthouse, Junho stood at his window, watching the city glow beneath him. The sky was starless, the world beneath him perfect and hollow. He reached into a drawer, pulling out a box he hadn't opened in years. Inside, a photo of Eun-ji, laughing beside a river, a single pressed peony still tucked behind her ear. Beneath it, a folded piece of paper, a hospital record, the one his mother had intercepted 3 years ago. Pregnancy confirmed, gestation estimated 8 weeks. He'd never asked questions. He'd never dared. But the thought came now like thunder. What if she kept it? What if she raised the child? What if? 2 days later, he arrived at the Deechin Village event dressed in tailored simplicity. His presence was calculated, not as heir, not as CEO, but as a man who supported small-town growth. The event was held outdoors, under a large white tent surrounded by wildflowers and paper lanterns. Stalls lined the square, selling crafts, local dishes, and handmade goods. He nodded politely through conversations with local officials and donors. But his mind wandered. There was something unfamiliar in the air, a softness, a warmth. Children ran barefoot through the grass. Music played faintly, and laughter echoed in the wind. Then he heard it, a small, clear giggle followed by 2 more. He turned instinctively. Near a booth of handcrafted flower arrangements stood a young woman, her back partially turned. She was adjusting a display of vases, her long dress fluttering in the breeze. But it wasn't her that stopped his breath. It was the 3 toddlers circling her like tiny moons around a sun. 2 boys and a girl, chasing each other in loose circles, their identical faces glowing with joy. One of the boys stopped mid-run and looked up at him, curious. Junho's heart nearly stopped. His face. The child had his face. The same deep-set eyes. The same curve of jaw. the same exact hairline that stared back at him every morning in the mirror. Junho blinked, stunned. The woman stood up then, turning to call after the children, and froze. Their eyes met. The world seemed to fall silent. It was her, Unji, but she looked different now, stronger, wiser. Her features softened by time and motherhood. There was no makeup, no luxury, just something far more radiant. She stared at him like she couldn't breathe. He took a step forward, his voice barely a whisper. Unji. She held the gaze a moment longer, then turned her eyes to the children. Come here, sweethearts, she called gently, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Stay close to me. They obeyed without question, running to her skirts and clutching her legs. Junho's throat tightened. He took another step. Are they? She shook her head slowly, voice quiet and sharp. Don't. He stopped. The space between them buzzed with unspoken truths. I thought you... He began, then faltered. I didn't know you were here. You didn't want to know, she said flatly. You never asked. He swallowed hard, staring at the children. Triplets. 3. My God. They're not yours anymore, she whispered. They stopped being yours the day you chose silence over love. Her words hit harder than any slap could have. He looked at her, his voice breaking. Can I talk to you? She glanced down at her children. Not here. She gathered the little ones and turned away, disappearing behind the booth with grace and control, leaving him standing in the middle of the crowd, stunned, empty, and filled for the first time in years with something he thought he had forgotten. Regret and fear. Because for the first time since he walked away, Junho stood frozen beside a flower stall that no longer felt like part of the world around him. Children ran past him, laughing, music played from a speaker nearby, but none of it reached his ears. All he could hear was her voice. They stopped being yours the day you chose silence over love. He tried to breathe, but something in his chest refused to expand. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a nearby chair, steadying himself. The triplets, 3, they looked just like him. There was no doubt, and yet he had no right, no name in their lives, no memories with them. They didn't even glance back at him when she walked away. He closed his eyes, pressing his thumb and forefinger against them, willing the weight behind them to stop pressing so hard. He hadn't expected it to hurt this much. He hadn't expected her to be here or to look at him like he was a stranger. But he deserved it, every second of it. From a distance, he saw her enter a smaller building behind the market, the old community hall. The triplets were by her side, one of them clinging to her skirt. He hesitated, then followed. The inside was quieter, wooden floors, soft lighting, a wall lined with local artwork and photographs of villagers, festivals, rebuilding projects. He stopped when he saw one particular photo hanging near the entrance, a black and white portrait of Unji, holding all 3 babies in her arms. Her smile in the photo was small but bright, peaceful. The caption underneath read, "Hope is not a gift. It is something we build, one moment at a time." His throat closed up. He stepped further in, heart pounding. She stood at the far end of the room, just finishing putting the children into a small play area with cushions and toys. She turned before he could say anything, already knowing he was behind her. Her arms crossed instinctively, her jaw tightening. "You shouldn't be here," she said calmly. "I know," he replied, voice rough, "but I couldn't leave. Not after seeing them. Not after seeing you." Her eyes met his sharp, unflinching. "You left before," she said. "Easily." "I was a coward," he said quickly. "I let fear make my choices. I let my mother, my company, everything else speak louder than the truth." "And what was the truth?" she asked. Because from where I stood, hungry, cold, pregnant and alone, the truth looked a lot like abandonment. He flinched. "I have no defense," he admitted. "Only regret." She looked away, her hands tightening around her arms. "I begged for food in the snow, Junho," she whispered. "With your children inside me. I nearly lost them. I nearly lost myself. I didn't know." he said, voice breaking. I swear to you, I didn't know how bad it got. I sent money, letters. I thought, you thought I'd take your guilt in an envelope and disappear. Her words cut deep, but he didn't interrupt. He had no right to. She turned back to him, her voice trembling. Do you have any idea what it felt like to bring 3 lives into the world alone, to rock them through the night? Terrified I wouldn't have milk for them in the morning. He stepped closer, eyes glistening. Unji, he whispered. I don't want to erase what you've done. I want to be part of their lives. I want to earn that. If it takes every day of my life, I'll do it. She stared at him for a long time. Then finally, quietly, she asked, why now? He hesitated. Because today I saw my face on 3 little strangers who don't know my name, and I realized I gave up the only part of my life that ever really mattered. She turned her back to him, staring at the photo wall. You don't just get to walk back in, she said. You don't get to hold them like nothing happened. I know. You don't get to confuse them with promises you might break again. I won't. You don't get to want them now that they're beautiful and laughing and whole. She continued, voice shaking. Where were you when I screamed through the pain, when I thought they were dying inside me, when I cried at night wondering if I was even strong enough to live? I was lost, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I thought I was protecting you by leaving, but I only protected myself. A long silence filled the space between them. The sound of a child's laugh echoed softly from the play corner. Unji closed her eyes, steadying her breath. He stepped closer again, carefully, slowly. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I need you to know that I remember everything. The way you smelled of petals and warm rice. The way you laughed with your eyes closed. The way you cried when you found out about the baby. She blinked, tears welling. I remember, he said again, and I never stopped thinking about you, about them. One of the triplets suddenly waddled over, a toy truck in hand. He looked up at Junho, curious. Junho knelt slowly, tears in his eyes. Hi there, he whispered, voice breaking. Do you like trucks? The child stared for a moment, then nodded. Unji watched silently from behind, arms wrapped around herself. The boy handed him the toy. Junho smiled through the tears, carefully taking it. Thank you. A small gesture, a first contact. Then the boy turned and ran back to his siblings. Unji's voice came again, soft but clear. They don't know who you are. I know, he said, rising. But I hope one day they will. She stared at him, her expression unreadable. And for the first time since that rainy night, he left her with an envelope and an apology. She didn't turn away. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. By the time Junho stepped outside the community hall, whispers followed him like shadows. Is that the chairman from Han Global? I thought he was just a sponsor. Did you see the way he looked at the triplets? They have his eyes. People didn't speak loudly, but they didn't have to. The weight of their curiosity buzzed in the air like electricity before a storm. Every glance felt like a question he didn't yet know how to answer. He moved through the crowd slowly, not as the tycoon with bodyguards and media coverage, but as a man stripped down to one truth. He had left something behind, and now the world was beginning to see it. A photographer approached him with a camera. Mr. Han, do you mind if I... No, he said quickly, lifting a hand. Please, not now. The man stepped back, respectful but disappointed. Junho continued walking until he reached the edge of the festival, where a large digital screen was playing footage of the village's reconstruction efforts. Clips of volunteers, children running with backpacks, local businesses returning to life. Then suddenly the footage shifted. Her face, Unji, appeared on the screen, smiling gently at the camera, holding a small bouquet as she spoke in an interview recorded months ago. I never planned to stay here, she said softly, but this town gave me a place to rest, to breathe again. My children were born here. They took their first steps on this soil. This isn't just a village anymore. It's the place that saved us. Junho felt like his chest had been punched from the inside. She had rebuilt her life. Without him, completely. Another clip rolled. Unji standing outside her flower stand, laughing as the triplets painted flower pots with clumsy, colorful fingers. A group of older women sitting nearby turned to look at him. They didn't smile. They didn't speak. Just one long, knowing glance. Judgment without words. He looked away. Across the courtyard, he saw Min-jae approaching the booth where Eun-ji now stood, arranging a new row of blooms with mechanical precision. The triplets were sitting on a mat under a tree, giggling together. Min-jae knelt beside them, tickling one gently while handing the others rice cakes wrapped in cloth. The children lit up instantly. One of the boys squealed, "Appa Min-jae!" Junho froze. "Appa." The word echoed through him like a stone dropped into a well. Eun-ji's eyes lifted toward the sound. Her gaze found Junho's again, and this time, her expression didn't harden. It just held. He walked toward her slowly. When he reached the booth, she looked down at the flower she was holding, a white lily, and carefully set it aside. "They love him," she said quietly. "He's been there since the beginning. Every fever, every fall, every night I thought I wouldn't make it." Junho nodded, swallowing hard. "I see that." She looked at him now, really looked. "You're not just walking into my life anymore, Junho. You're walking into theirs. I understand." "Do you?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of strength and fear. "Because they're not trophies. They're not some symbol for your redemption arc. I'm not here to take anything from them," he said. "Or from you. I just want to be allowed to care." Her hands tightened around the edge of the stall. "I used to imagine this moment," she confessed. "That one day you'd see them and everything would make sense. That you'd look at them and fall in love with what we created." He took a breath. "And now I'm afraid," she whispered. "Because if they let you in and you leave again, I won't be able to fix that. I won't be enough to put those pieces back together." Her eyes shimmered. "You broke me once, Junho. I can't let you do that to them." "I won't," he said quickly. "I swear to you, if you gave me even one chance, I'd show up every single day." A long silence stretched between them. Then she asked, "Would you start with just a name?" He blinked. "What?" She nodded toward the children beneath the tree. "They don't know you. You're a stranger. So don't walk in trying to be their father. Walk in as a person. Show them who you are." His chest ached with hope. "What should I say?" She turned back to her flowers, carefully arranging a daisy next to a rose. Her voice was gentle. "Start simple," she said. "Say hello." A few feet away, the triplets giggled around a wooden block tower. He approached slowly, his shadow falling across the grass. One of the little boys looked up again, the same one who had handed him the toy truck earlier. Junho knelt. "Hi," he said softly, his heart thudding. I'm Junho." The boy tilted his head. The little girl stood up suddenly, her tiny face serious. She pointed at him. "You were at the flower tent," she said with absolute certainty. "You looked funny." He chuckled, nervous. "I guess I did." She stepped closer, inspecting him, then looked at her brothers. "He talks like Uncle Min-jae, but fancier." The boy grinned. "Does he have snacks?" I don't," Junho said, flustered. The children frowned. "Then why are you here?" the littlest one asked, clearly suspicious. Junho felt his throat tighten. He looked past them for a brief second, where Eun-ji stood watching, not smiling, not guiding, just watching. He returned his gaze to the children. "Because I wanted to meet you," he said simply. "I think about you every day, and I know I've missed a lot, but I hope you'll let me be your friend." The children exchanged looks. Then the middle one, the quietest, picked up a wooden car and placed it in Junho's hand. "You can play," he said softly, "but only if you don't break it." Junho smiled through the sting in his eyes. "I won't," he whispered, as he sat cross-legged on the grass, building a tiny block tower with the three strangers who shared his blood. The crowd and whispers faded into the background, but Junho felt none of it. He sat on the grass, hands now dusty, knees aching from crouching too long, but the block tower in front of him had become a fortress. The triplets were climbing over his lap, giggling, offering him mismatched toys and demanding he make car noises like Uncle Min-jae. And he did, awkwardly at first, then with real effort. Brrrr, zoom. The sound made one of the boys squeal and fall over laughing. Eunji stood nearby, arms folded tightly against her chest, watching the scene unfold with a storm behind her eyes. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't ready, but something inside her shifted. He looked natural there, not like a stranger anymore, not like a polished, distant version of the man who once left her under the rain, but just a man, a little older, a little undone. She stepped forward slowly. "It's getting late," she said softly. "They'll get cold." The children barely noticed. They kept playing, stacking blocks, arguing over colors. Junho stood up gently, brushing off his pants, looking down at them with a gaze filled with something deeper than regret. "I should go," he said, turning to her. "I didn't plan to stay this long." Eunji nodded, arms still crossed. "You weren't expected." He offered a faint, honest smile. "I know." They stood in silence, the air thick with everything that still hadn't been said. "I don't want to confuse them," she said after a moment. "They're still so young. They don't understand the world the way we do. You can't just appear once and vanish again." "I'm not vanishing," he said immediately. "Not again." She studied him carefully. "They were born in silence," she said, voice steady but wounded. "They cried without anyone holding them but me. They learned to crawl on wooden floors you never saw. They had birthdays with paper crowns and no father. They survived you." His chest rose and fell with each word. "I deserve that," he whispered. "All of it. And yet you're here." "I'm here because I couldn't stay away anymore," he said, voice cracking. "Because I saw them and realized I've been breathing all this time without truly living. Because I let my fear destroy something I never stopped loving." She looked away. Her lashes fluttered once, but she didn't cry. "I'm not the same girl you left," she said. "I'm not waiting anymore." "I don't want you to wait," he said. "I want you to live. And if you'll let me, I want to live alongside you, even from a distance. Even just watching from the sidelines if that's all I'm allowed." "People change when it's convenient," she said. "Regret doesn't make you a father." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I'm asking for nothing. No title, no forgiveness, just a chance to do something that matters, even if it's small." She looked at him again. This time, something behind her eyes softened, only a little. "You'll have to talk to Min-jae," she said. His face fell slightly. "Of course." She turned slightly, her voice quieter now. "They call him Appa because he's never missed a morning. Not one. He stayed when I was too tired to lift them. When I was angry. When I was afraid. He didn't run." "I admire him," Junho said truthfully. "I mean that." She finally uncrossed her arms. Her fingers twitched slightly, a sign she was nervous, though her voice didn't show it. "You should leave now, before they ask why you're not coming home with us." He nodded, swallowing the sting those words left behind. "I understand," he said. He turned to go. "But then wait," she said. He stopped instantly, breath catching. She walked toward him, stopping just a step away. Not too close, not too far. "I'm not saying I trust you," she said slowly. "But if you meant what you said, if you want to prove something, the community center is looking for someone to fund the children's library." He blinked. "Library," her lips twitched. "They need shelves, books, a reading program, someplace safe after school." His voice was barely above a breath. "Consider it done." She nodded once. "Then maybe next time, we'll see if you can read a story to your son without losing the plot halfway." He let out a shaky laugh, part joy, part disbelief. "I'll practice," he whispered. "I'll know if you don't," she said, turning back toward the children. He watched her walk away, toward them, toward the life she had built. He didn't follow. Not yet. But for the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a man with a beginning. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the story. Inside the community center, volunteers were clearing out the last of the decorations from the festival. Stacks of folded chairs, bundled cords, empty flower crates. Among them, a few familiar faces lingered: the mayor, the coordinator, and murmurs. The photo from the event had already begun to circulate. Junho sitting on the grass, laughing as one of the triplets smeared jam on his white shirt. A rare image, unposed, unguarded. By midday, his name was trending online. Not for a business deal, not for a scandal, but for a single headline: Tycoon's heart changes course after seeing his triplets for the first time. The comments were instant. Some were sympathetic, at least he showed up. That's more than most. Others were sharp: 3 years too late. Must be nice to come back when they're already cute. But none of them knew what it really felt like. Not like Eunji did. She sat in the small reading nook of her home that afternoon. One of the babies sleeping in her lap, the others napping nearby. The window was cracked open, and the wind carried the faintest sound of children playing outside. She wasn't reading. She was staring, thinking. Min-jae stepped into the room quietly, holding a folded newspaper in one hand. His eyes met hers. "You saw it?" he asked. She nodded. "It's everywhere." He sat across from her, letting the silence breathe between them before speaking again. "They want a statement. The reporters, the foundation reps. Even the board at Han Global is spinning it like a redemption story." She didn't look up. "I'm not interested in stories," she said. "I've already lived the one they ignored." Min-jae nodded slowly. "I figured." He unfolded the paper and placed it gently on the table between them. The photo stared back up at her, the same one that had gone viral. Junho, laughing in mid-motion, hair tousled by wind, surrounded by the 3 children whose eyes mirrored his. Eunji let out a soft, bitter breath. "I never thought I'd see him like that," she murmured. "Not again. Not like that." Min-jae studied her for a moment. "Do you regret letting him speak to them?" She looked up at him, surprised by the question. "No," she said after a pause. "I regret that he ever made it necessary for them to meet him as strangers." Min-jae nodded, eyes falling. "And now?" he asked. Her voice was quieter now, almost fragile. "Now? I don't know." Min-jae leaned back slightly. "I won't pretend this doesn't hurt. Seeing them run to him. Hearing them laugh like he'd been here all along." She watched him carefully. "But I also won't pretend I own them," he continued. "I love them. God, Eunji, you know I do. But I'm not going to fight to be the only one. If he's here to stay, then they deserve to decide who they want in their hearts." Her eyes welled, not with anger, not with pain, but something deeper. Something that looked a lot like gratitude. "You've never asked me to choose," she whispered. "No," he said gently, "because I knew if I forced you, I'd lose you." A long silence passed. Then he stood up, walking to the door. "I'll take the night shift with them," he said with a faint smile. "Get some rest." As he left, she whispered behind him, "Thank you," but the words held more than she could say. That night, the triplets stirred earlier than usual. A storm was moving in, thunder low in the distance. Eunji rose quietly and walked to the nursery. They were all sitting up, half asleep, half dreaming, and reaching for her the moment she entered. She picked up the little girl and cradled her gently. "You okay, love?" she whispered. The girl blinked, then asked, "Where's the man with the blocks?" Eunji froze. "The man with the truck noises," one of the boys added, rubbing his eyes. "He said he would come again." Her chest tightened. She kissed the top of their heads. "He might come, but you know what, you have many people who love you. Every day. But he said he'd learn stories." The smallest one murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "He said." His words trailed off into breathing. Eunji held them close, rocked them gently, and for the first time, she cried not out of pain, but out of the terrifying, aching possibility that maybe, just maybe, they were ready, even if she wasn't. The next morning, a letter arrived at her door. No media, no cameras, just a small envelope, hand-delivered by a courier. Inside, a handwritten note. "Eunji, There's no version of my life where I can undo what I've done. But if there's a version where I can stand beside them, even in silence, even from a distance, I will choose it every day. If you allow it, I'd like to come by tomorrow, just to read them a story. You don't even have to be there. I'll sit on the floor. I'll turn the pages. I'll do the voices. I'll fail and try again. And if at any point they look at me and smile, that will be enough. Jay. She folded the note with trembling hands, her breath caught in her throat. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling through the trees. And for the first time in years, the kettle whistled, but she didn't move. Her hand rested on the table, fingertips brushing the corner of the envelope as if still unsure whether to open the door to the man who had once left her on a stormy night, with nothing but silence and unborn children in her womb. She looked toward the nursery, where giggles floated out in bursts. The triplets were up early again, playing with a basket of books. Min-jae appeared in the hallway, still tying his watch around his wrist. His shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. "They're full of energy today," he said, smiling. Eun-ji didn't answer right away. She turned her gaze back to the table. Min-jae followed her eyes. Then he nodded quietly. "You read it." She nodded. "He wants to come. Today." Min-jae didn't speak. Not for several seconds. "Are you going to let him?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Part of me wants to say no. Part of me wants to scream that it's too late." She finally looked at him, her eyes raw and torn. "But then I see their faces. How they lit up when he played with them. How they remembered him in their dreams. And I wonder if punishing him means punishing them too." Min-jae exhaled deeply, crossing his arms. "You're right to be afraid," he said. "He made you carry everything alone. But he's not the same man, Eun-ji. I saw it." He looked like he didn't know how to breathe when they touched his hand. She blinked hard, lips trembling. "Why are you always the one reminding me to be gentle?" he shrugged. His smile quiet and bittersweet. "Because I've loved you long enough to know that your heart is bigger than your fear." Her breath caught. Then, softly, she said, "If he comes, will you stay?" Min-jae paused. And then he answered, simply, "Of course. I'm not going anywhere." Later that afternoon, the rain stopped. The clouds parted just enough to let through a pale, tired sun. The village was damp, but golden in the way only early spring could offer. Fragile, clean, hesitant. Eun-ji placed a few cushions on the floor of the reading nook, rearranging the children's favorite books. The triplets ran around barefoot, carrying plush animals and blocks. There was a strange electricity in the air. Not anxious, not quite joyful, but charged with something none of them could name. At exactly 4 o'clock, a soft knock at the front door broke the quiet. She froze. The children stopped too, looking up at her. Another knock. She glanced toward Min-jae, who stood at the edge of the hallway. He gave a small nod. She opened the door. Junho stood there, hair damp from the light mist, a book in one hand and nothing else. No bodyguards, no press, just him. She stepped aside. "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to be late," he answered. He walked inside, slow, deliberate. His eyes moved across the space. The shoes by the door, the drawings taped to the fridge, the scent of warm laundry in the air. He didn't try to speak yet. The children peeked from around the corner. The girl was the first to run out. "Truck man," she squealed. He let out a soft breath of laughter. "Hi there." One of the boys followed her, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. The other hung back, shy, holding Min-jae's hand. Junho crouched on the floor and opened the book. "I brought a story," he said, "but you'll have to help me with the voices, because I'm really bad at them." The children gathered slowly, curious, cautious. The smallest one climbed into Eun-ji's lap. The girl leaned against Junho's arm, and the boy with the dinosaur sat right across from him, wide-eyed. He opened the first page. It was a story about a lion who lost his roar and searched the whole jungle trying to find it again. Page by page, his voice grew stronger, braver, and when he tried to mimic the lion's mighty roar and failed miserably, the triplets burst into giggles that shook the walls. Eun-ji sat behind them, silent, watching. 100 memories came rushing back. The way he used to read menus aloud in silly voices just to make her laugh. How he once whispered poetry to her in the dark. How she used to imagine him reading bedtime stories to their unborn child. And now here he was, not in a dream, not in regret, but real. When the story ended, the little girl clapped. Again. Later, Unji said gently. It's almost dinner time. The children whined but obeyed, slowly getting up and running back toward the nursery, shouting something about dinosaurs and cake. Junho stayed seated on the floor. Unji stood, arms crossed, heart pounding. He looked up at her. Thank you for letting me come. She didn't respond at first. Then, they like you. He smiled a little sadly. I don't know if I deserve that. They don't give love because someone deserves it, she said. They give it because they're children, because their hearts are still wide open. He nodded slowly. I want to be here, he said. I want to learn how to be in their lives, slowly, on your terms. I know I'll never earn back what I lost. But if you let me, I'll build something new. Her arms dropped to her sides. I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking you to, he said. Just the next page. One story at a time. She looked at him then, eyes tired but clear. Then we start with the truth. He nodded. And for the first time since their story had shattered, they didn't speak like ghosts. They spoke like two people trying to build something from the ruins. Unji sat on the porch, the wooden floor beneath her bare feet still warm from the day. She held a steaming cup of barley tea, watching the sun melt behind the mountains in hues of gold and faded blue. Junho stood just inside the doorway, hands in his coat pockets, unsure if he should speak or leave. She finally broke the silence. They're already asking when you'll come back. He stepped onto the porch slowly. I didn't want to leave. She gave a small nod. They don't know what absence means yet, only presence. And they liked having you there. I want to keep showing up, he said softly, standing beside the railing, eyes on the same horizon. Even if it's awkward, even if it's hard, I want them to know I'll stay this time. She sipped her tea. You can't just say that, Junho. You have to mean it, every single day. I do, he said, turning to face her. I've spent the last 3 years building an empire that meant nothing without them. Without you. Unji didn't meet his eyes. Do you think words can fix this? No, he whispered. But actions might heal parts of it. She turned toward him then, her expression not angry, but tired, real. You didn't just leave me. You left them before they ever had the chance to know you. I know, he said, voice cracking, and that truth will follow me every day of my life. She looked down at the tea in her hands. I used to cry thinking of all the things you'd miss, she said. First steps, first words, first fever. I imagined how you'd smile if you heard them laugh. I still imagine it, he murmured. And today, when I finally heard it, it didn't feel like joy. It felt like grief. The words hung between them like fog. She looked up, her voice shaking. They call Minjae Appa. He never asked them to. He never tried to replace anyone. He just loved them, one day at a time. Junho lowered his head. I understand. If they always call him that, I won't be angry. I'll be grateful, because someone gave them what I didn't. Unji's throat tightened. So what do you want from them now? He lifted his eyes to hers. Just a chance to be known. To sit at their level and listen to what makes them giggle, what makes them cry. I don't care if they ever call me anything. I just want to be part of their lives, as someone they can count on. Her hand gripped the edge of the cup. You know what trust looks like to a child, she asked. It looks like routine, familiar hands, a voice that doesn't disappear. He stepped closer. Then I'll be the voice that stays, he said. Even if I have to whisper until it becomes part of their memory. Her eyes shimmered with emotion. She set her cup down and stood. Tomorrow, she said, they're going to the clinic for a checkup. You can come with me. Junho blinked, surprised. Are you sure? No, she said honestly. But I'm trying. He nodded, something gentle breaking across his face. That's all I could ever ask. She stepped back toward the door, but paused. "And one more thing," she said, turning slightly. "Yes, don't just show up for them," she said. "Show up for yourself too, or you'll disappear again." Even while standing right in front of them. He didn't reply, but she didn't need him to. The next morning came quickly. The village clinic buzzed with quiet chatter and the scent of clean cotton. The triplets ran ahead, one tripping over his own feet as a nurse giggled behind her mask. Junho sat beside Eunji in the waiting room, holding a tiny juice box the children had refused earlier. He leaned toward her, whispering nervously, "Do they always have this much energy before shots?" She smiled, "Just barely. They're impossible before and worse after." When their names were called, the nurse paused. "Mr. Han, are you the father?" Eunji's body stiffened, just slightly. Junho glanced at her, then replied calmly, "I'm someone who loves them very much." The nurse nodded kindly. "That works." As they walked down the hallway, one of the boys reached up and took Junho's hand. Small, soft, trusting. He looked down at that hand, and his heart cracked wider than it had in years. They entered the exam room. The doctor greeted them warmly, began the routine. Weight, height, heartbeats. The children squirmed, giggled, then one burst into tears during the shot. Without thinking, Junho picked him up, cradling him close. "It's okay," he whispered, rocking gently. "You're safe. Appa's here." He stopped mid-sentence. The word had slipped out before he could stop it. The child clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. Eunji turned slowly, meeting his eyes. He didn't say anything. He just held the boy tighter, face hidden in his soft hair, breathing in the reality of the moment. Knowing he couldn't ask for the title, but aching with every part of him to be worthy of it. Later, as they walked back home in the late afternoon light, one of the triplets, holding Junho's hand, asked, "Can the truck man stay for dinner?" Eunji hesitated, then nodded. "Just this once," she said. Junho smiled, blinking fast. "One dinner at a time," he whispered to himself. He didn't care. The triplets were wild with energy, bouncing in their chairs, demanding more kimchi, more stories, more songs. Junho tried his best to keep up, and every time he stumbled or got the lyrics wrong, they laughed like it was the funniest thing in the universe. Eunji sat across from him, watching, quiet, guarded, but watching. Min-jae served the soup, his movements as calm and steady as always. If he felt any discomfort, he didn't show it. He slid the bowl in front of Junho, meeting his eyes only briefly. "Eat," he said simply. Junho bowed his head slightly in thanks. "It smells incredible." "It's her recipe," Min-jae replied, nodding toward Eunji. She looked up, startled. "You made this?" Min-jae's smile was small. "You haven't cooked this since before." She hesitated for a second, then gave a faint nod. It felt right tonight. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was thick with meaning. Every spoonful carried history. Every shared glance across the table was a thread stitching the broken fabric of what had once been. After dinner, the children ran to the living room, squealing for one last story before bed. Junho followed, the book already in his hand. Eunji stood, beginning to gather dishes, but Min-jae touched her wrist gently. "I'll handle this." She paused, unsure. He gave a small smile. "Go. Watch him." She looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "Are you sure?" "I'm always sure about you," he said softly. Her throat tightened. She leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. A thank you, not a promise, and walked toward the sound of giggles. In the living room, Junho sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by pillows. The triplets curled around him like kittens. His voice was steady, animated. He was doing the voices again. Poorly, but with his whole heart. When Eunji leaned against the doorway and watched him, a memory rose up, uninvited. It was from the night he left her. She had begged him to stay, hand on her belly, tears burning down her cheeks. "You're already their father," she had cried. "Why won't you act like it?" And he had turned his back, cold, silent. now watching him cradle a sleepy boy against his chest, humming softly as the child drifted to sleep. She saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen that night, remorse, and something else too, devotion. He caught her looking. His lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but she shook her head gently. "Don't say anything," she whispered. "Just keep holding him." He nodded, tightening his arms around the boy. Later, when the children were tucked in, their breathing even and soft, Eunji and Junho stood outside on the porch again, this time under a sky scattered with stars. The air was cool, but not cold. A gentle breeze tugged at her hair. He broke the silence first. "I don't deserve this." She didn't answer. "I know you're waiting for me to break again," he continued, "for me to disappear, but I won't." She looked out into the dark, then said quietly, "I'm not waiting for anything. I'm surviving, day by day, with or without you." He turned toward her. "Then let me."